Welcome back to the show. It's more 6:33. Michael Lebowitz, CFA, joining me this morning, talking a little bit about Biden versus Trump, policies versus markets, economy, Fed. We were going to come back and talk about the policies versus the market. I'm going to punt that for a second. We're going to come back to that in a moment here. We had a question on YouTube that I think is worth exploring here, because this is the question really that people want to know. So if you want to vote for policy, right? What should you vote for? So let's pretend for a moment, since this is my show, I'm president and Mike is vice president, and we're running for office. So what policies? So the question is, well, what policies are better for the economy? Okay, well, unfortunately, the policies of both candidates right now are not good long-term for the economy. That we will wind up with $30 to $35 trillion in debt, debt to GDP ratio of somewhere between 125 and 130%, and the economic growth rate is going to be somewhere sub 2%. Economic disparity is going to become worse because of the policies that we're continuing to enact. Because the belief is right now that deficit spending is the only answer. But Mike and I are going to be are now throwing our hat into the ring. We're going to run for office, so you can vote for us in the upcoming election. Just do a write-in for Lance and Mike. And here's our platform. And I'm going to tell you that, importantly, this platform that I'm about to tell you, and Mike and I will discuss this with you for a second, is this will lead to long-term economic growth, and we will return the economy back to longer-term economic prosperity for everyone. You will not vote for Mike or Lance because of what I'm about to tell you. So the first part of our policy is that we're going to be reducing the deficit. The first thing that we're going to do is that, as president and vice president, the only thing that Mike and I are going to focus on is national defense and infrastructure in the economy, because that, under the Constitution, that's all the job of Washington is. Everything else we're returning back to the states. Department of Education, Department of Energy, Department of Labor, all that's going back to the states. So we're going to be saving a boatload of money in Washington by not spending money on those things. We're going to send those back to the states. We're going to let the states deal with those issues independently and how they feel is best for their education, labor, everything else for their state, and however they want to do it. California can do their thing. They can teach the 1619 project, and Texas can do their thing, right? So all of the states, we're going to take all that money. We're basically going to lay off about 3/4 of the workers in Washington, D.C. These 900,000 non-essential workers will be permanently non-essential. And we're going to be applying all that revenue now that's coming in from tax into paying down the deficit and getting us back to a budget surplus. And by the way, the first thing that Mike and I are going to do is we're going to pass a budget that will be outlining all of this. That will be our first 100 days of office. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to start reforming Social Security to ensure the longevity of Social Security. We're going to be raising the minimum age for, or actually the age that you can obtain Social Security, and also adjusting how the income structure is done into paying for Social Security. So we want to ensure the long-term survivability, but we're all going to have to pay a little bit of price here in terms of fixing these problems. But I'll tell you what Mike and I are going to do is that in Washington, Mike and I are going to lead the way. We're going to sacrifice first in Washington before we come to you and ask you to sacrifice in terms of helping us get this country back on track. Now, Mike, your viewpoints.
I think that's right. Right. We need to, although you're going to get me killed in D.C. firing all those people.
Probably.
So, Brent, you're next in line after they get me.
Exactly. He's Speaker of the House.
Great.
You're right. I mean, to do, if it was my platform, I would say what I'm going to do is make my children's economic future much brighter. And by doing that, you're also going to make we've talked about this, the social fabric of the country much more cohesive. But that is 5, 10, 15 years down the road and involves a lot of pain. So if you think about what we do during recessions, we avoid the pain, right? And every time we avoid the pain, we're not permanently avoiding it, we're pushing it to the future. And that's what we've been doing now for 30 years with more and more frequency. So what we're going to do is essentially administer pain.
Right.
And it's pain, though, that will ensure the future is brighter. We're going to push the economy back to the productive nature. We're not going to favor corporations. We're not going to favor individuals. We're going to let productivity rise again. The productivity growth rate in this country has been declining for 30 years, meaning we get less and less out of each unit of labor. And we need to make that increase, because when it increases and the rules are fair, that gets shared with the entire community. And that's why, even regardless of what's going on, this country is so much wealthier than every other country.
Right.
That's because of the economy we built and the rules we have. But we're quickly chipping away at that. And that's got to end. We also have to put an end to the monetary games that are basically allow us to do what we do, right?
Yep.
If there was no Fed, interest rates would be higher, right? And everyone's going to say, "Oh no, but we can't buy housing and this and that." Well, that's okay. That's okay, because house prices are way too expensive. And it would be nice if people could afford houses that aren't ridiculously priced.
Right.
And if interest rates were where they should be, where savers could make some money, then, in the long run, the economy would be better. And I know, I'm a homeowner. I know what that would do to the value of my house.
Right.
And, you too, Lance.
Yep.
But
that's okay.
But the Fed abets the government, right? They allow them to do what they're doing. And now they're saying, it was funny. There were a couple comments out, I think it was earlier this week, where the Fed said that the government has gotten so big that the private sector cannot handle the debt on its own. That is complete and utter, I can't curse, nonsense. Right?
Yes.
The private sector, being investors, being foreign nations, being me and you, being our 401ks, can handle as much Treasury debt as they can issue. The
you
question
just have to give
is,
us
what's
a rate.
the price?
You just have to give us a rate that's worth owning it.
Right. At 5%, you got my 401k.
Yes,
You can
absolutely.
have it, right? But the Fed believes that rates need to be at zero so that we can continue to borrow from our future at no cost.
Well, and this is exactly right. And the reason that nobody will vote for this platform, again, is because it requires, it's interesting because Barack Obama has said this several times during his presidency, which is shared sacrifice, right? We all need to sacrifice in order to achieve these long-term goals. And this is truly what we're talking about in terms of shared sacrifice, because this is where, as individuals, we have to, step up to the table and say, look, this is going to be painful for a while, right? As a generation, we're going to have to take this pain. But if we do this and we make these shared sacrifices and make these changes, the long-term economic prosperity will be more than beneficial for everyone. Everyone will benefit rather than just the top 10% of the economy.
Right. And if we would have done this 10 years ago, if we would have let that recession play out, if we would have let some of those banks fail, and we would have let other companies fail, and we would have let the stock market price to where it should have priced, and the Fed would have largely stayed out of it. They do have a role, but they grossly overstepped their role, and they did so for 10 years after it, and they've done it once again with, even bigger footsteps. Things would be better today, right?
Yeah.
We'd still be in a COVID recession. Don't get me wrong. We shut down the economy. That's not good. But we'd be on much better ground. The Fed wouldn't do as much as they're doing. The government wouldn't have to write checks to everyone. But we decided to take the easier way out in 2008, in 2000, in the early 90s. And even periods where we didn't have a recession, 2016.
Right.
We probably would have had a recession. Remember, the Fed did 3 rounds of QE well after the recession was over.
Right.
The Fed actually started QE4. No one remembers this, but in October of 2019, right? They started buying bills and mucking around with the repo market.
Right.
The Fed is against any sort of recession. Right? They're gonna fight every recession, but the problem is, and you just wrote about this, Lance, is you need a recession.
Yeah.
You need a recession.
Recessions are not, there's this attitude that recessions are this terrible thing because they cause economic pain. Yes, but what they do is they reverse these excesses. And again, people don't want to be told that higher interest rates are good, but because if interest rates come up, right, they can't buy a $300,000 house. They can only buy a $150,000 house. And who wants to live in that kind of a house, right? But, the problem is we've distorted living standards by this, access to easy credit. We've continued to lower the requirements for people to get and use credit. We continue to extend more credit as we financialize the system over the course of the last 40 years. And that's been really the driver, has been what's been increasing the economy, is also the thing that's also been degrading economic growth, which is just the increases in debt on a consumer basis as well as on a government basis. And, total debt right now in the country is more than $75 trillion. Our economy is only $19 trillion, right? So when you're running $5 of debt for every dollar's worth of GDP growth, you've got to really ask yourself exactly what kind of growth you're getting. Quick break. We'll come back. Michael Lebowitz right here. We're going to shift back on gears, and it was a great question, and it was worth the conversation. We'll come back, talk about now, the policies of the presidents, Biden and Trump, as they relate to the markets and the Fed. Come back with that right after the break. Don't go away.
Got questions for Lance later? Ask now at realinvestmentadvice.com.
Who will win the election in November? How will that decision affect your decisions for your retirement? Richard Rosso and Danny Ratliff's next Candid Coffee can answer your questions about money, retirement, risk management, and how to identify and protect your household against financial vulnerability, regardless of who's elected. Send your questions and join this live GoToWebinar event at realinvestmentadvice.com. Candid Coffee with Ratliff and Rosso at realinvestmentadvice.com.